Well, hello again, dear ones. Dr. Robert with you here on a Tuesday afternoon. It's 2 o'clock on the Mountain Time Zone, and I'm sitting here all alone. Well, I know you're out there watching. Thank you. Appreciate you with us. We've had some technical difficulties. Reverend Elzia got waylaid in an airport, and I'll tell you, there's no way to get around that background noise. It would not have been a fun time chatting with him this afternoon. And our scheduled guest had some technical difficulties, as well as a scheduling overlap that created a whole snafu as well. So rather than force you to listen to me babble on about all kinds of weird stuff for the afternoon, which I'm just, I don't feel would be fair. Talking with Elzia, we dug into the background and the archives, as it were, of our organization and our YouTube channel, and we came up with this. We so hope that you enjoy
this Thought Media Network. We are a global broadcast network of positive music, media, and entertainment, inspiring humanity's evolution along the journey of enlightenment and creating a world of love.
All that stuff. Let's jump to the good stuff. It's Reverend Dr. David Alexander. And hello again, dear ones. Rev Briz with you over here.
Rev Z right here.
Rev D right here.
And this is New Thought Today for July 9th, 2024. So grateful that you're with us. And our special guest, who is not a stranger to the program, Reverend Dr. David Alexander, with us all the way from Atlanta and the Spiritual Living Center of Atlanta. Dr. D, tell everybody a little bit about yourself. Let everybody know what they need to know so they know you enough to get started here today.
Yeah. Well, you said it all there. Spiritual director at Spiritual Living Center of Atlanta, here in Atlanta, Georgia. Husband and father of 2 amazing kids, and been around the New Thought Centers for Spiritual Living world for a long time. Born and raised in it, actually, and served in the Pacific Northwest for many years, and Leadership Council, etc. And just authored a new book that's out, Freedom from Discord, and excited to be talking to y'all about it today.
Yeah. And folks, that is our topic. Just in case anybody was wondering, I do have my copy right here. There's lots of notes that we can talk about. But I would just want to jump off with, Dr. David, I don't think I have seen any book in the New Thought movement in the last decade that was more anticipated, I think, than this one. You've been speaking about liberation theology for a while now. This isn't exactly, dipping your toe in the water here.
Mm-hmm.
I actually have a couple of memes I found recently of quotes you've made about this same topic. And so when word got out that you were writing a book around liberation theology, I think you had a lot of people lining up to grab a copy of this. So tell us a bit more. How did you get to this? And wherever you want to dig in or wherever you want to dive in, we'll start the conversation there.
Yeah, for sure. Well, just to launch from that point, it was a conversation, online on our listserv, on our social media feeds with colleagues, quite frequently about the concepts and the sort of the principles of liberation theology. And it was clear that there was always, I should say, it appeared as if there were those who were in agreement, that we were some form of liberation theology, or at least the practices of. And it was clear that there were some people that were like, no, we don't belong there. We don't belong in that realm. We shouldn't be talking about politics. We should stay out of, and this is the tradition. This is the way it's been handed down to me and all of that. So it's, that tension and that divide has been around for a long time. And so it was clear the more we talked about it in social media feeds, that it was like, okay, somebody needs to do something, and and maybe part of me was waiting for somebody else to do it. But actually, this is what happened. Holmes Institute asked me to teach a class on social justice and New Thought, and I had done a weekend version of that class before in the San Diego campus many years ago, and so I began kind of preparing for that. And they wanted to really fully bring it integrated into the curriculum and make it not an elective but a core element. And in order to do that, part of the certification of the School of Ministry is that anybody who teaches a core class like that has to have a master's or a PhD in that subject or in that field, and that's part of their distance education, their accreditation standards, and I don't have that, and so that kind of put the brakes on that project, and it got me to thinking, and I thought, well, well, I can't teach the class, but what if I write the book? What if I write the book that the class has to use, right? Because to your point, there was no book. There's plenty of books about liberation theology, but there was no book about liberation theology from a New Thought perspective, from a New Thought lens, and where the intersection is, and whether that's even a legitimate argument to make, etc. And so I said, well, let me get busy on that. And the more I talked about it and little snippets online or whatever, the more excitement people had. And when's it coming? When's it coming? We really need this. And so there's a lot of build up, and so we finally got it out there. And it really goes back to, I tell the story in the book. It goes back to Trayvon Martin. When I was ministering in Oregon, and when that moment happened, and everything since it, the book really, and the ideas in the book, and what spurred my own research and my own study about this for decades, was really just like the intersection of the kind of the rubber hitting the road of the radical implication of our teaching, the radical application of oneness, of wholeness, of all of these principles, and like, what does that mean in the context of, racism or sexism or homophobia or transphobia or whatever happens to be going on, in the context of these things, which we know are, out of principle and out of alignment. But what does our faith say to that moment? And the idea that I grew up with, which, those of us who've been in New Thought for a long time, the idea of, well, you just kind of go within and know your wholeness, and don't identify with, that's not true, and so you go within and know the truth, and like that's kind of it, like I was like, oh, isn't there more? Like, okay, I mean, I don't want to deny that that's the practice, right? Yes, we do that. We turn within and know the truth, but isn't there more? And especially as a minister who was and still is, in a pulpit every Sunday, and these moments are happening in the news, and I can see the questions on congregants' faces, whether they were saying them out loud or not. I could see the pain. I could see the anxiety. I could see the, all of that. And it was like, don't we have more to say than just that? And I had that same question. And so that question led me to dive in and to explore, these places. I mentioned that Sharif Abdullah's book, Creating a World That Works for All, was really the spur. It came out kind of the year I started pulpit ministry in 2004, and 20 years ago now. And I just devoured it when it came out. And I thought, oh, this was the only work that really put justice work in context to consciousness. Right? What is the role of consciousness in relationship to that work? And And so that was the closest that we have to kind of, this kind of work, but there was something more to be said from a deeper social justice context. So that's how we got here.
Yeah, and I love that. I love you have the photographs in the background of King and Dr. Cohen James there. I was blessed to have attended several of his lectures at Schomburg Library. And I remember very distinctly, he was doing a contrast between Malcolm and Martin. Throughout the talk, he was leaning heavily on some of Malcolm's teachings at that time. And someone in the audiences and said, well, I don't know if you're a Christian or not. You sound like you're leaning more, or minister, you're leaning towards Malcolm. And he said, well, my father was a minister, my grandfather was a minister, and my great-grandfather was a minister. He said, but what I learned from them was that as a minister, you have to be involved in the community. And it's this yin and yang between Martin and Malcolm in terms of liberation, of how we get beyond these critical issues of human development and human sustainability, that as a spokesman for the divine, you can't just overlook and say, we're going to think about it. We're going to pray about it. Because, Black people in that perspective have been praying for a whole long time and not a whole lot had changed.
Yeah. I point out in the book that and something that I learned really from James Cone, that Martin Luther King Jr. He would get in trouble from his own community, right? That people in the Black church community were upset when he got so involved in civil rights, because he wasn't doing the work of a minister, right? He was doing this social justice stuff, and they were like, well, essentially like, well, when's the last time you've done a revival, or saved, you're not doing altar calls at your meeting, you're not doing the traditional things that ministers are supposed to do. And his response to that was, I still do that privately. I still bring people to Christ or whatever that is, and I can do that anytime. But there's bigger work that we need to be focused on here, right? So yeah, that idea that do we just stay inward focused, or do we focus outward and say, what is the implication? And for the context of us here, as the CSL version of New Thought, I remember in 2012 in New Orleans when we voted for that vision, that statement, a world that works for all and awakening humanity to its spiritual magnificence. I dropped my ballot in that box, and later that, the next night at our party, they announced and they said it passed 98% and 99%. And I thought, oh my, they have no idea. They have no idea what they just did. They have no idea, right? Because that statements are inherently social, and they're inherently justice oriented.
Right.
Yeah. And so for those who want to argue kind of for the old New Thought, the old way of doing it, so to speak, then really the vision statement is like creating a world that works for me, right? And awakening myself to my own spiritual magnificence. Which at a personal philosophy level, there's nothing wrong with that. But that's not the statement of the organization. The organization says we're about creating a world that works for all, or for everyone, and awakening humanity, not just ourselves, but humanity. So those are social, and those are justice-oriented statements, whether we knew it or not. It's like we walked into something that was like, oh boy, here we go.
Here we go.
Well, you guys need to figure out how to do this now.
and one thing you bring up there, David, for me is, if we go back to that old idea of natural philosophy, when natural philosophy was the leading edge of spirituality, right? And this whole idea of nature, and that the divine representation of how things should be every ecosystem you look at, there is an integral relationship between everything in it, whether it's a rainforest or a desert or a cloud forest, the ocean. And so when we made that statement of a world that works for all, we have perfect teachers throughout the planet that says, if you go to a rain, and I like the rainforest because I think it's the most diverse in all of the things from the creepy crawlers to the primates in the trees, there is a relationship that does not get broken, right? There's a boundary of respect. There's a chain of reliance of one thing for the other, and there's a respect in that. And we don't seem to have that as humans or humanity. And I think New Thought is perfect to transcend all of that stuff that keeps us from doing that, to say, look, the best way, this is one planet. Yeah, there's all this talk about going to Mars, but ain't nobody got there yet. And if we blow this one up before we get there, we're gonna have a problem. So let's figure out how to work to make this happen now.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Dr. David, I reflect on your sharing back in 2012 when I agree with you. I don't think a lot of people fully understood the implications of the vision that was being cast. And we knew it wasn't true just yet. We knew we weren't there, and we knew it would take quite a while. And here we are a dozen years down the road, and to some degree, it feels to me like it's been a rocky road to travel, in that there were, and probably and still are, a lot of people that I think want that old time New Thought. And yeah, we always said treat and move our feet, but that was just, move my feet for me. And you've been kind of touching on that, and that we're now at that point where if we're not doing something for everybody, it gets things get really ugly real quick, it seems. And we've got Kim Summers with us, sharing, got to put feet under our prayers because faith without works is dead.
Yeah.
And I agree with that point. I think that it's theologically, well, we're going to talk about the theology of liberation here before we're done, obviously, but do you see the New Thought movement putting the faith behind this? Are we there yet, or is that the next step?
I think it's the next step. Although I do think I've seen the organization, and I'm speaking from a CSL perspective, and I know things that are happening in Unity, but I'm not as plugged in to those current activities and ANTN and so on. But from where I sit and what I can see, the diversity, equity, inclusion committees and the social, our new spiritual leader has been pulling together that committee along with some others, and the social, I think the spiritually motivated social engagement, or whatever that group was called, bringing them together under social action. And so there's and that's from the top, right? So from the top, there's been a commitment to that, and that has grown over the last dozen years, and so I do think we're moving in the right directions. We have ministers who want this stuff, and we have right now. There's people all across the country in the book study on this book, and that includes ministers all over the place. And so I do see that, but there's just so much more to go, right? And of course, there is also the other side, which is those who kind of, want the genie to go back in the bottle, and I don't want the conversation to unfold in a way that says like one side's right and the other side. It's like, if we just pause there for a second, of course we want the genie to go back in the bottle, right? Like, I think all of us, myself included, yes, I long for a simpler day, and I could just do my thing, right? And that's all I had to do, and everything worked out. Like, we all long for when we awaken and our mind expands, there comes a point in that stretching and that expanding where we kind of long for, oh, it was so much simpler when I was asleep. Yeah. Right? It was so much simpler when I didn't know what I now know. It was so much easier when I was, so yeah, we all want, I think, to some degree, the toothpaste to go back in the tube, but it ain't going to happen.
No.
And I have watched progressively, I talk in the beginning of the book about my experience of putting up the sign of Black Lives Matter in my church in Oregon at that time, and what that experience was about, and how it was received. And I've watched as, that movement and other movements, the Me Too movement and so on and so forth, and how that energy has grown, and more churches have found the courage to do their version of that. And what's interesting is to watch that grow over time, right? Where now it's kind of like, well, of course you would do that, and of course you would. And when Roe went down, and all of a sudden, all of these, ministers were out there going, this is wrong, and Roe v. Wade, and we got to, protect women's health care and all this stuff. And it was like, well, where were you when I put the sign up and you and you told me to be quiet? You're out here now, aren't you? Which is great, and I applaud that. It's wonderful, and it's the same thing that we're facing now. Another layer of that. It's like, man, if you haven't gotten it yet, and you read, Project 2025, and you don't have a voice yet in your ministry for speaking for humanity and defending kind of common decency and everything. Boy, I feel bad if you're trying to squeeze that genie back in the bottle and say we don't do that. Guess what's coming? That old poem of, and they're coming for, and they came for, and I didn't speak up because it wasn't me, and I didn't speak up, and then there was no one left. There's about to be no one left because they're coming for everything.
Well, and there's something you said there, David, about being asleep. It's like, now as we got all these tornadoes popping up all over the place, you can be asleep if you want, but the tornado is still coming. And it's better to be awake so that you can go into underground shelter if you need be, as a metaphor, to regroup when that thing goes by, or because you can't stop it. The movement now, the train has left the station. So, that's why I love your book, in that it's telling people, look, these are issues that are already here. We can pretend that they're not. We can come up with a lot of placation about why we should not take this mantle on. Yeah. But in reality, it's coming, and it's going to have an effect. And, what I learned in terms of New Thought is, it's better to be prepared and not have an opportunity than to have an opportunity and not be prepared. And so I want to be prepared. So I need to prepare the people, myself, my community, about the challenges that we face if we cannot begin to have the single-minded vision of humanity and service first.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think the book highlights that kind of work that we're going to have to do as ministers, spiritual leaders, and teachers, to keep this ball rolling.
Right. And to keep it simple, right? I mean, our teaching is about consciousness, and that's why I start the book talking about the power of story, and then looking at the role of religion and violence and justice, because all of those things, as I've made the case many times, that all of the ills of the world, all of the isms that plague us, all of those things are simply constructs of consciousness, and they only exist because there's a consciousness behind them that supports them. And we are the ones, we are singularly the ones, quite frankly, right? If we gather a table of the great justice workers and storytellers, and shapers of humanity, we are the ones at that table, if we're at the table at all, but we are the ones in the room who say, and this is a unique voice that New Thought has, who say, we understand how consciousness works. And not only that, but we understand how to change it. We understand how to identify error thinking and replace it with better ideas and move in a new direction. We understand how to go from vision to manifestation through positive thinking, through finding and rooting out the error thinking that doesn't work. This is our science. It's literally what we teach. And yet somehow it's taboo or wrong to do that on the collective level. Why would it be taboo if everything, all the isms of the world are simply constructs of consciousness that are error thinking, that are held in place by them just not being challenged, because an error thought operates as truth as long as it's not challenged, right? So we know this, and we know how to address it. And so the book, in many ways is sort of an attempt to say, this isn't that hard. Yes, it's scary or it's uncomfortable because we haven't done it for, I would say we haven't done it for a while. Right? In chapter 5, I talk about our radical roots, and I say, the women's movement, they were all about social issues. Emerson, they understood consciousness and the abolitionists and fighting for women's rights and whatnot. So our early roots were actually, understood this intersection that we're talking about. We just got away with it, or got away from it. Kind of capitalism and marketing of New Thought and American capitalism kind of came into being in the 1930s. The movement drifted in that manifesting kind of direction. But anyway, yeah. So there you go.
As my teenagers would say, it always comes back to capitalism.
Right. Yeah.
Right. And I think that's an important distinction that you make in the book. And I had heard you say this before the book came out, that in the hands of a charismatic leader of color, New Thought becomes a liberation theology. In the hands of a charismatic leader, a white leader or melanin challenge leader, it becomes a prosperity gospel. And we hear a lot of pushback against the prosperity gospel, but I love the kind of the both and of it all.
Yeah.
It's now time to embrace our role in dismantling these systems of oppression, not just saying, oh, they exist and I'm going to pray them away, but where do we get a little dirt under our fingernails? How do we get into the arena and really begin the dismantling of these systems?
Yeah, absolutely. And that, that I have always said that it is about context of our teaching, right? In the context of, kind of white privilege, it really lends itself to a teaching of what I call a theology of privilege. It's about manifesting your good and doing all that wonderful stuff. And the same teaching, same principles, you change the context. And to your point about prosperity gospel, look at somebody like Reverend Ike. He's teaching prosperity gospel, but he's teaching it to a predominant, if not solely, African-American audience, in Madison Square Garden, and he's telling people, don't fit the stereotype that they want you to be in, they want to say that you're poor and you're this and you're that, and no, and so it's the same teaching, but the context changes it such that he's literally using it to take shackles off of the minds of the individuals, and saying these shackles that society has put on you, that stereotypes and prejudice has put on you, take them off, because there's something else inside of you, right? And you don't get that from Ernest Holmes of Beverly Hills, right? Because the shackles aren't there necessarily. So, but that said, when pressed, right, when the magazine listing was changed in the Science of Mind magazine, for the East Los Angeles Church of Religious Science to the bottom to colored church or whatever, right? And Ernest immediately went and addressed that. So when pressed, our leaders they understood the liberative nature and the universal nature of our teaching. Raymond Charles Barker, when, asked the hotel that they were at in New York City, they asked their members to use the side entrance, which happened to also be the servant's entrance, because it was making hotel guests uncomfortable. He turned around and said, "You'll never see us in this hotel again." and took his church elsewhere. So when pressed, even our melanin challenge, as you called them, leaders have understood the liberative nature of our teaching. And so that's kind of the point. It's like, well, pressed into real context of our society, what does our teaching say to these constructs that still plague us?
Mm-hmm. And, you know, that whole idea of liberation theology, it fits all manner of man, physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual, right? So it allows itself to expand and contract based on the environment it finds itself in. So that story with Reverend Ike, the liberation that he was trying to address was the liberation of attitude, of mind, of prosperity, of being of value from that perspective. In slave time, that liberation theology was, how do we get from under the yoke of slavery? In the 60s, it was, how do we get social justices and equal rights? And so the teachings of all the isms, if you will, at their metaphysical roots, and we'll go there for a minute, they all teach how to liberate ourselves from a foreign thought or a foreign idea that is different from the inherent divine idea of freedom and friendship and service and love, which is natural until we begin to learn some of these other things. So, you know, that creates the great discord, right? And how do we free ourselves from that is what we have to work with. And I'm looking forward to getting me a study group in the fall and take it line by line so we can get free.
Amen. Amen. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Hey, folks, we got to take a quick break. Let a couple of our sponsors say hello. Let Dr. David get a sip of water and maybe a little stretch. We'll be back in just a minute or two with more on New Thought Today. Stay with us. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Time waits for no one. It's true. Regular registration for Celebrating Our Soul has closed. Fear not. Late registration is available. While there are limited seats, there is room for you if you register now. Go to padntg.com and register, and you will experience phenomenal live music, unique masterclasses, scrumptious food, and loving fellowship. Don't delay. Do it today. Go to padntg.com and join us at Celebrating Our Soul, consciously creating change. See you there.
You're invited to join us for the Convention of the Americas. Your light is my light. Your light is my light. And we're back with more of New Thought Today here on the New Thought Media Network. Our special guest today, Reverend Dr. David Alexander, all the way from Atlanta. And we're talking about his new book, The Promise of New Thought Liberation Theology, Freedom from Discord. And Dr. David, it feels to me like you pulled out a whole bunch of the stops here in this book. You've got Kevin Ross in the beginning, Rev Kev in the beginning as a forward. You got Bishop Yvette in the back end as the afterwards. You've got Ernest Holmes in here in the Sermon on the Mount, the Centers for Spiritual Living vision statement, the unity statement of principles, and I'm probably forgetting a few things. Yeah. It really felt to me like reading this that there was a walk in your talk aspect to this, of being inclusive of the unique and varied voices that create the overarching New Thought movement. And I've always, my entire time watching you always feel like you're somebody that's willing to step outside the parameters, outside the prescribed playground, let's say, to see where New Thought is rising up and how it's showing up. And I'd love for you to share a little bit of what that journey's been like. It seems to me like a lot of people, we find New Thought in one camp or another, and then we plant ourselves there, and everybody else is nice and all, but I like this thing the most. And you seem to be very well rounded in your engagement with other New Thought beliefs. I don't want to say belief systems, but other ways that New Thought represents itself or shows up in the world.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I go to the line from my teachers. Demonstration is the only authority, right? Demonstrate. That's it. It's like we have the practice of the principles in our life, and then our life and our insights are the demonstration, and that's all we really have to go on. And so for me, growing up in this, I was always very curious. It's like, well, we claim this thing to be universal. We even claim that the things that we're teaching don't really belong to us, right? Holmes is very clear, like even these principles don't even really belong to religious science or to me as they're just this universal something that I'm putting together and articulating in a particular way. And I really like that. I've always really liked that idea. But then I've challenged myself to say, okay, well, if that's true, well, then where else is it popping up? Where else are we seeing? Where else are we? Where else are people tapping into that universal stream? Matthew Fox has that beautiful metaphor. One river, many wells, right? So where are the other wells that are tapping into that same universal stream? And that led me to my relationships with Bishop Carlton Pearson and Bishop Yvette Flunder and so many others. And that they're tapping the well in a different place. And so if you go on the surface to where their well is, they're all dancing and speaking in tongues, and it's this Pentecostal tent revival, but the well that the water that they're drawing up is connected to the same river, and I'm over here, and we're a very white Protestant and very we have our hands like this and we clap after the song, and there's not a tambourine in sight, um, but it's the same river, right?
Yeah.
So my consciousness growing up in this was taught to look for the river, and to celebrate the different ways, the different wells, and the different points of connection, and that continues today. Here in Atlanta, there are two bishops who are currently creating larger conglomerate affiliations under their leadership. One is my friend D.E. Paulk, and I'll actually serve on his bishop's council. It's going to be called, it is called the International Communion of Expanded Consciousness. And Bishop Pearson was part of the seeding of that in the early days. And the other is Bishop O.C. Allen, and I believe his is called the something about the United Progressive Pentecostals or something like that. That's not the exact name, but so there's two groups that are doing something that is going to have streams within it that sound very New Thought, and certainly tap some of our sources, but still culturally and in celebration and in their style and ways of being are still going to be very much their own traditions. And so, those are just two examples. Brother Tete in Africa, is another example of somebody who tapped into the universal stream, had visions of who Michael Beckwith was, but didn't really know, any New Thought authors or anything like that, Ishmael Tete. So again, where are those, if that's true, if we teach this universal thing, then where do we see that? And I've always had an attraction of being just a person where it's like, I want to hang out there, wherever that's happening, that's where I want to hang out. Those are who I want to know. And so it's led me to some great people and some great relationships and some deep conversations, because and I think the result of that is that it humbles me as a New Thought teacher, right? I don't think that Erdous Holmes is the last great prophet, and that we who have his books and teachings, are the the sole forebearers of the greatest teaching on earth. I think it's a profound and wonderful teaching, and I think, like Ernest Holmes, I think it's a universal teaching that other people are tapping into as well. So it keeps you humble to say, who else can I study with and learn with, and then who else can I walk alongside with, into the world of creating, a better world.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, you got my mind spinning in 1,000 different ways here on that, because, one of the things, and Robert and I were talking about this the other day, is that it's time for a new thought think tank. Not sure how we construct that, how that happens, who the constituents are, but we need a think tank that allows us to come together with the various teachings, and they could be new thought from an Islamic perspective or Christian perspective, because as I understand and as I learn, the new thought idea is based on principle, and principle is universal. So there's a principle of electricity, but I can get electricity from hydro, thermal, solar, fossil fuel, nuclear, and some way we haven't even thought about figuring it out yet. So when we can go back to principle from that scientific perspective, knowing that this sets a parameter or sets some law, some ideas in motion that we need to figure out the laws about, get that think tank going so that we can exchange these ideas and do these projects and figure out what works in this environment. If I'm in a windy environment, I'm going to get turbine. I'm not going to get solar wind. I'm in solar energy. So we figure out the environment that we're working from, take this principle or these principles and apply them in that way. We're going to be way ahead of the game, but it's going to take all of us to come together. You're a solar specialist, aqua specialist, a thermal specialist, and then we begin to work.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I want to tag into this because as you were sharing, Dr. David, my mind is thinking, okay, right now in the news, any good liberal or progressive is shouting the warnings about Project 2025. And truthfully, from my perspective, that's well and good, but we're $5 late and $5 late and a few decades late in that discussion. We're at that point where the only thing we can do to stop that right now is vote, and vote loudly, and vote, I want to say often, but that wouldn't be legal. So just vote once, folks.
Vote early, vote often. Yes.
Vote early and vote.
Trademark.
and vote your conscience. But at the same time, how can we build that sense of a coalition amongst all the various places where New Thought is uprising, within the Pentecostal movement, within the Jewish traditions, within other places? Because the truth is, from everything I can see, Christian nationalism is on the rise and having its way, especially here in the United States. As we've mentioned in this program, to turn a blind eye is where there is no vision, the people perish, right? If we turn a blind eye, we have no vision of what's happening. And I've started to hear some quiet little conversations about what would it look like for a New Thought march on Washington. Or maybe let's change that to a New Thought march with Washington, or a people. And I know Dr. Bishop William Barber has the Poor People's March, and could you see, or do you see something of that nature actually working? And do we have enough critical mass that isn't going to try to hold that back, saying, "Oh, that's not us. That's not who we are. We don't do those things."
Yeah, I hope we're over that part of it. But I guess time will tell. I think the first step is to gather ourselves and to talk amongst ourselves and decide with the right leaders in the room, not just the people in our movement, but the leaders as well. AG&T, was big on this for many years, and it's kind of fallen by the wayside, but it needs to be revived in some form or fashion. The work needs to be revived, and maybe it needs to come from the masses, from the people. And the first step is to decide that there is something bigger, worth, some people might not like the phrase fighting for, but there's something worth praying and moving our feet towards and for. There's a vision worth articulating and stepping into that is bigger than any one of our little fiefdoms, right? It's bigger than unity. It's bigger than CSL. It's bigger than divine science. It's bigger than ANTN, INTA, AG&T, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's bigger than all these things. And I haven't always been convinced that collectively we feel that way. I've served on boards, and the thing about leadership within a particular organization is that if you're in that leadership, you're charged with the sort of the protection and preservation of that particular organization. Like that's your job, Self-preservation is the thing, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. I'm very proud of my CSL roots, and I have served. I'd gladly serve again at some point. But at some point, we have to have leaders who are, while they're still doing that, are participating in something bigger, and they're moving the organization towards something bigger than, because if all we're doing is the survival of our own little brands, then we're actually all going to crumble. It's not going to work. We need to be part of something bigger. So I think that's the first step. I think gathering at Unity Village and really having a collective conversation about that bigger thing, and then inviting, because when the fear drops away of our individual survival, then we can start building a bigger tent. And I mentioned the organizations that are growing, that are being spearheaded here in Atlanta. Expansion of conscious expansion with Bishop D. Paulk, O.C. Allen's group. TFAM is another one, that's Bishop Flunder's organization, the Fellowship of Affirming Ministries. The other one that I see modeled, so I'm mentioning all those to say those are all different groups that should be invited to the conversation, because they're all doing some version of this. Unity Fellowship out of New York, which is not the Unity Church movement, but Unity Fellowship is a whole different group. And the other group that I see does this really well, and we'd be wise to sit down with them, is actually the United Church of Christ. The United Church of Christ has one of the broadest coalition, most diverse, kind of like open on all sides kind of tent, because they organize around a single principle, and that it's like the single pole of the tent. And the tent is open on all sides. It's still collectively, it is a mostly white denomination, but it has some very strong African-American parts, roots and pieces to it. It has Native American groups. It has, and these various pockets, very rich in their culture. They're very committed to their cultural expression. And yet they belong to this larger tent. And they don't see a problem with that, right? Like there's just no need under the tent to squash those diverse expressions or kick them out and say, no, you got to go be your own separate thing because you do it differently than we do. They actually go, no, you're part of the collective tent, because the center pole in that tent is called United, right? It's the United Church. We are united. And so we have all these, and they do it in a way that I just marvel at, because they're huge. I've gone to one of their conventions, and it's just like, put our New Thought conventions to shame. And they've got whole convention rooms full of people just on earphones listening to translation of whoever's speaking in their, in their native language, kind of thing. Like the infrastructure is massive. And I think we could really learn some lessons from that. Like, what would it be? What is the center pole for New Thought that we could all gather under the tent, and we don't have to take down your way of doing it, my way of doing it, whether you're Phil Morian or CSL or Ernest Holmes or the 12 principles or the, like whatever, that's fine. We all bring these various diverse, expressions to the table, but there's something bigger. And I'm not sure all of our leadership, in this current iteration is committed to that. I don't know that it's not. I'm not, I'm kind of on the outskirts right now. But I'm curious about that. I think what it would take, it's kind of a long answer to your question, but like, that's the first step. Like, let's do that. Let's gather under that tent. And then when that fear goes away of not needing to protect our individual fiefdoms, then we can invite more people. Then we're not afraid of what some of these other coalitions that I've mentioned, what they're doing, and let's bring them in too. And let's say that, because they just increased the size of the tent, right? And now we've really got a mass. If you include all those groups that I just rattled off, try making an acronym for that. That we're got the whole alphabet. UFP, it's long, right?
How about we just call it ONE?
Right.
We'll just call it ONE. Everybody will get that, right? Yes.
Because the greater truth is, there is again, we kind of struggle behind what to call it, but there is a push of progressive spiritual thought that is moving through denominations and is moving through different spiritual expressions and spiritual communities, religious and non-religious. There is and that's the move of spirit. It's just the move. That's one of the things Bishop Flunder has always said to me. She says, the reason you and I get along, she says, is because we're both people of spirit. We call it the Holy Ghost, you call it visioning, but we're both people of, we listen to and follow where that spirit evolves and pushes us, and that's the common denominator. So let's follow that. So one more thing about this, because I think it's important. Her dear friend, my dear friend, our mentor, the late Bishop Carlton Pearson, this was his greatest desire, was to get all of New Thought kind of under one tent for this kind of gathering. And when we would have conversations about it, Bishop Flunder was very brilliant in articulating, she would say, and I'm going to use polarizing language here for a minute because that's the context of the world that we're living in, but she would say, those who are gathered on politically on the right, they're very good, they're very organized, they're very strategic. And while there's lots of different groups, right, there's all kinds of different groups in every state and different foundations and different, whatever. But she said, you know what? When it's election time, they line up, and they line up behind 3 or 4 things, right? Abortion, the Supreme Court, what gun rights, right? It's not even as big and diverse as the Republican Party platform. It's really just kind of like 3 key things that it's like, boom, we are united on that, right? And she said, we can't do that we have been unable to do that on the left, because we get so worried about, well, who's in charge and whose name's on front and who's collecting the money and what about this idea and this issue and what about, and as soon as it just diffuses and becomes a mess because we're fighting with each other. So, like, what if we could get together and say, what are those 3 or 4 things that we're not going to get everything else ironed out, but what are the 3 or 4 things that when the bell tolls, because it's about to toll, we will line up and say, we're there on that. We're not going to let that go. So some version of that in our movement would be great.
Yes. All right, folks, I think we have found a rally cry, and we do need to take one more quick little break, but we've got one more segment with Dr. David, so don't go away. Stay tuned. We'll be back right after we say thank you to our organizational sponsors and individual donors. Stay tuned. Please help us say thank you to our organizational sponsors, including the Hefferland Foundation, Affiliated New Thought Network, International New Thought Alliance, Science of Mind Archives and Library Foundation, Center for Spiritual Living Denver, Center for Spiritual Living Midtown, New Thought Philadelphia, Planned Happiness Institute, Summit Center for Spiritual Living, One Heart Retreats, Center for Spiritual Living on the Lake, Unity, Kitchener, Unity Spiritual Center, Ottawa, Home Center for Spiritual Living, Satya Center, Begin Within Ministries, Center for Spiritual Living, North Jersey, Unity of Savannah, and the Center for Spiritual Living, Seattle, as well as all of our individual donors. Thank you for being part of the New Thought Media Network. Please like, share, and subscribe. New Thought Media Network, positively inspiring.
The New Thought Men's community proudly presents New Thought Men's Summit, Foundations, an online conference, September 22nd through 27th. Register today at www.newthoughtmens.community, featuring 22 New Thought speakers, ministers, and visionaries, sharing their wisdom of modern spiritual masculinity. New Thought Men's community, empowering wholeness, centered in spiritual living.
Yes, thank you to all of our organizational sponsors and individual donors. Folks, do keep an eye out for the Men's Summit coming in September. As a matter of fact, all three of us here will be presenting on that summit. So we'll be sharing a virtual stage, and someone with a key to the back door of that into the inner workings of that, it's a really great lineup of men coming together to share spiritual principles. I think even the ladies will enjoy what we're creating. So join us for that. So, all right, we've been here talking about freedom from discord, the promise of New Thought Liberation Theology with the author, Reverend Dr. David Alexander, and no stranger to the program. I trust will get you to come back again and again as this progresses. And Dr. David, I think Elzia can testify. I have been talking about a New Thought tent revival for a couple of years now, and maybe it just needs to be a national tour, and we find ourselves one big donor, take all you guys on the road for a week and visit a whole bunch of cities. We'll make you the center pole of that tent maybe, and let you stand there and have that platform. But I really want to reiterate, I think what you're striking on is actually the very future of New Thought. That's the question we strive to answer on this program every week, and you've done a great job of it here today. Getting us all together in a bigger tent with a bigger table is, I believe, paramount to the future of this philosophy, faith, and way of life. So again, we want to thank you for being here. Before we run away, though, folks, we always do our final thoughts. Let's kick it over to Rev Z for some final thoughts.
Yeah, I being a child of the South and of the '60s, when I hear revival, I get excited because when they put the revival tent up, it was about what Dr. David was saying earlier. It was about, you open the tent doors, that music starts reviving the spirit, and the door is open for anybody and everybody to come and get that spiritual rejuvenation. And I think it's time, because spirit has no face. Spirit has no culture, if you will. It has no ethnicity, as you will. It is the energy that moves worlds and lives. And when we can revive that at its root level, that says, look, we're all in this together. Let's get moving. Let's get shaking. And as we would say, come sit on the moaning bench. For anybody from the South who understand what that moaning bench is, you know what we're talking about. And let's get a revival in our whole way of thinking, so that our motto of a world that works for all can really kick in and do what we needed to do. So that's
beautiful. Thank you, Dr. David.
Oh, well, thanks for having me. And I hope the conversation continues. Anybody out there, if you pick up the book, order it on Amazon. The ebook version is on the CSL shop, so you can read it on your Kindle. And at newthoughteducation.com, we have a book study, which got videos and all of that. So even though the book study is going on now, if you've missed some of those, because they're about midway through now, you can still join, or you could just sign up for it and then get the videos to use in your own personal education. So check that out, and thanks for carrying on the conversation. I think this is really in the hands of the individuals, right? It's really the whole thing is really about how do we carry the message of New Thought into the context of the world that we find ourselves in. And that's the challenge of every generation. And we know how Ernest Holmes did that because we have his book, and books, because that's how he did it. He lectured and he wrote, and we know how the Fillmores did it because we've got Unity Village, and that was their response and their call. So what is ours? And so this is my little drop in the bucket, contribution, and I hope it spurs others to think about theirs, and we just continue to go from there. I said on Sunday, and I'm sure we'll be continuing to say, I don't know what happens between now and November 5th. I know what I hope will happen, or what I pray for, and what I affirm. But what I definitely know is that we're going to need each other. We're going to need spiritual community. We're going to need places of affirmation and consolidation and collaboration. And so if you're out there listening to this, get into a spiritual community, whether it's online or in person, whether it's mine or somebody else's, I don't care, but get into a community and participate and advocate and engage and tithe and support, because we're going to need each other, and community is really important. We've gotten so used to this, to Zoom and video and being distant from each other, but there's something coming, and we're going to get through it because we have community.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, no doubt.
Thank you. Well said. Very well said. It's more than a little drop, by the way. Having read this and all that I've read in the last 20 years of being in this movement, this is more than a little drop. I honestly believe this will be part of will mark the point where we wake, where New Thought awakens, where we're a turning point to where we are moving into a whole new perspective of what New Thought can do to further this vision of a world that works for all. Whatever language we use, whatever faith tradition we come from, I keep coming back to that line that we are a philosophy of faith and a way of life.
Yeah.
And I think that we're in that third phase of really demonstrating this is a way of life, and it's not just a way of my life, but it's a way of all of our lives.
Yeah.
And it's the way that we can create the oneness and express and experience the oneness on the planet. So I appreciate you for championing the conversation. I'm sure you've probably heard at least a little bit of pushback somewhere along the last 10 years of moving this conversation forward. But now no one can deny the time is here to have this conversation and to keep this moving forward. There's a whole lot more we could talk about, folks, and we'll see when we can get Dr. David back in again to do some more of that. But until then, we definitely want to wish you peace and richest blessings. Bye now.